The winter of 1956 was a cruel one. Snow came early to the little town of Brookston, curling around the lampposts and piling in soft, indifferent layers along Main Street. Most mornings, the streets were still quiet by 8. Only the faint hum of the bakery's oven and the groan of the milk truck broke the silence. Across from the courthouse square stood a narrow brick café with faded paint and a crooked sign that read Ellis's Diner. It had been there for 20 years, too long, some said, for a man like Ellis. Inside, the air smelled of grease, coffee, and cigarette smoke. The counter shone with decades of polish and grief. Behind it, the owner, a tall, severe man with sleeves rolled high and a cigarette clinging to the corner of his lip, wiped the counter as if scrubbing away a stain that would not disappear. That morning began like any other. The radio murmured about distant politics and a new law being debated in the state capitol, something about equal rights and federal pressure. Ellis grunted and turned it down. The regulars arrived one by one, farmers with cracked hands and tired eyes. They filled the booths, ordered eggs and bacon, and exchanged nods with the man behind the counter. The world outside could shift and tremble, but here time stood still. At 8:30, the bell over the door chimed. A man stepped in, quietly, carefully, as though the air itself might reject him. He was wearing an old army coat, the kind issued during the war. The fabric was faded, but the patches were still visible. One on the shoulder, one above the breast pocket. His boots were scuffed, his hands red from the cold. He removed his cap and brushed the snow from his hair. His eyes were calm, measured, and impossibly tired. For a moment no one spoke. A few heads turned. A fork clinked against a plate. He chose a seat at the counter, 2 stools away from a truck driver sipping black coffee. The owner's rag froze mid-wipe. "You lost?" the man behind the counter asked, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. The veteran's voice was soft. "Just looking to get warm. Maybe some coffee." Ellis's jaw tightened. "You can't sit here." The man blinked. "I don't understand." "I said you can't sit here," the owner repeated. His voice rose just enough for the others to hear. "Take your business somewhere else." The air changed. The truck driver lowered his cup. The waitress behind the counter, a young woman with nervous eyes, paused mid-step. Outside, the wind moaned through the cracks of the door. Inside, the silence grew heavy. "I fought for this country," the veteran said quietly. "I bled for it. All I want's a cup of coffee." Ellis's expression hardened. "Then you should have fought for a different one." A few of the men at the back laughed uneasily. The waitress whispered, "Ellis, please." But he ignored her. The veteran rose slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He only looked at the man behind the counter with a gaze that could have cut glass. He pulled a small coin from his pocket, a silver piece, worn smooth by years of handling, and placed it gently on the counter. "For the trouble," he said. Then he turned and walked out into the cold. The bell rang once, and the door closed behind him. Outside, the snow had thickened into a slow, relentless fall. The veteran stood for a moment beneath the diner's awning, staring at the ground. He looked older than he probably was, his shoulders slumped, his breath heavy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The paper had yellowed at the edges. A government seal, half-torn, was still visible at the top. He stared at it for a long time before tucking it back away. Across the street, an elderly man stood by the courthouse steps, watching. His overcoat was buttoned tight, his hat dusted with snow. He had seen everything through the diner window. For a moment he considered walking away. But something about the scene, a soldier turned away from warmth, stirred something old in his chest. He began to walk toward the diner. Inside, Ellis was still pacing behind the counter. The waitress had resumed her work in silence, her eyes glassy with discomfort. One of the farmers muttered, "Didn't have to be that way," but no one said more. Then the bell rang again. Everyone looked up. The man who entered was no stranger. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, though his clothes were plain. His voice carried softly, yet firmly. "Morning, Ellis." The cafe owner's expression shifted. "Mayor." Didn't expect to see you. The mayor removed his gloves and brushed the snow from his shoulders. I was across the street. Thought I'd stop in. Ellis forced a smile. Coffee? On the house. Maybe later. The mayor's eyes wandered to the counter. I just saw a man walk out of here. Army coat. Looked cold. Ellis's smile faded. Didn't belong here. The mayor's voice was calm. And who decides that? You know how it is, Ellis said. People talk. Folks don't want trouble. Trouble, the mayor repeated softly. He looked around the room, the customers avoiding his eyes, the waitress pretending to polish a cup, the old radio humming faintly in the corner. Seems to me, trouble already walked through your door, Ellis. Just not the kind you think. No one spoke. The air thickened again, heavy with unspoken things. Where'd he go? The mayor asked. Ellis shrugged. Didn't say. Doesn't matter. The mayor adjusted his hat, his voice still quiet but now edged with something sharper. It matters to me. Outside, the snow had deepened. The veteran walked along the edge of the road, his breath turning to mist. Each step left a shallow print that filled almost immediately. He passed a church, a gas station, a schoolyard buried in silence. The town looked peaceful, almost picturesque, but there was an ache beneath the surface, an old, unhealed wound. He reached a bus stop by the railway line and sat on the bench. A single suitcase rested beside him, its leather cracked and patched. On the tag, the ink had faded, but a last name was still visible, written in careful block letters. He pulled out the letter again and read the first few lines under his breath. Dear Sir, we regret to inform you. His eyes lingered on the words until they blurred. Then he folded the paper and placed it back inside his coat. From a distance, the sound of a car approached. The mayor's sedan pulled to the side of the road. He stepped out, the cold biting his face, and walked toward the bench. You left your coin behind, the mayor said, holding up the silver piece. Figured it was worth more than coffee. The veteran looked up, surprised. You didn't have to. I wanted to, the mayor replied. He studied the man's face. You were in the war? Europe, the veteran said simply. Then Korea. Then back here. The mayor nodded slowly. This town doesn't see many like you. Maybe that's for the best, the veteran murmured. A long pause passed between them, filled with the quiet rush of wind and the distant rumble of a freight train. Finally, the mayor asked, Where are you headed? Not sure, the man said. Got a letter says I'm due for a job down south. Might try my luck there. The mayor hesitated. You got somewhere to stay tonight? The veteran shook his head. Don't need much. The mayor thought for a moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. There's an old boarding house by the mill road. Tell them I sent you. The veteran looked at the envelope but didn't take it. Why are you doing this? The mayor's expression softened. Because once, a long time ago, someone didn't. The veteran studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. He took the envelope and tucked it beside the letter. Thank you. The mayor smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. He watched as the man stood, lifted his suitcase, and began to walk down the road toward the bridge. The snow swallowed him little by little until only his outline remained, a dark figure against the white. Back at the cafe, the radio crackled again. The newsman's voice spoke of new veterans returning home, of laws changing, of people demanding something called dignity. Ellis turned it off. His hands trembled as he reached for his cigarette. The waitress stood near the back, watching him. He wasn't hurting anyone, she said quietly. Ellis glared. Mind your business. You didn't have to do that, she insisted, her voice shaking. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. He knew better, Ellis snapped. You think I want to lose my customers? This is how it's always been. The waitress looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, Maybe that's the problem. She removed her apron and left it on the counter. Then she walked out into the snow. Ellis stood there, staring at the empty stool where the veteran had sat. The silver coin was gone, but the mark of it remained. A small ring of moisture, slowly fading into the wood. Outside, the the sky darkened early. The snow turned to sleet. And in that small town, whispers began to spread before nightfall. About the soldier turned away. About the mayor who followed him. About the diner whose warmth had suddenly grown cold. By morning, the story had reached the courthouse, the post office, the church steps, and beyond. Some said the mayor had invited the veteran to dinner at his home. Others said he'd returned with him later that night to the diner, demanding Ellis apologize. But no one knew for certain. Only one thing was clear. Something had shifted in Brookston that day. A small act of cruelty had broken the town's calm surface, and the ripples were still spreading. And by the time spring arrived, people would learn that the veteran had not come to Brookston by accident. He had come looking for something or someone, and that someone lived right behind the counter of Ellis's diner. The snow melted slowly that spring, reluctant to release its grip on the town. The streets of Brookston turned to gray slush, the air carrying the smell of damp soil and wood smoke. Most days passed quietly, but something in the town's rhythm had changed since that morning at the café. People noticed things now: who sat where, who walked past whom, what was said in low voices after church. And though few admitted it aloud, everyone knew it began with the man in the army coat. The mayor, however, could not stop thinking about him. He had seen too much in his years. Men rise and fall, wars end and begin again, but something about that soldier's eyes stayed with him. There was a story there, something unfinished, as if the man carried a piece of someone else's burden. And the mayor suspected, deep down, that Ellis was part of it. He kept his curiosity quiet. In a town like Brookston, questions had a way of turning into headlines. But over the following weeks, he began to listen, to the shopkeepers, the postmaster, the few who claimed to have spoken to the veteran before he left town. One afternoon, he found a lead. At the post office, the clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, mentioned a letter. "Came through about a week before that business at the café," he said, lowering his voice. "Addressed to a boarding house up near the Mill Road. From a veteran's office in St. Louis. I remember it because of the seal." The mayor's interest sharpened. "You still have the address?" The clerk nodded, scribbling it on a slip of paper. Wasn't sure if the man ever picked it up. The mayor folded the note carefully and tucked it into his coat. The boarding house stood at the edge of town, near the old textile mill that had shut down after the war. It was a sagging white building with peeling shutters and the faint smell of coal dust in the air. The owner, an elderly widow named Mrs. Darnell, greeted the mayor with cautious politeness. "Yes, I remember him," she said, her voice gentle but wary. "Quiet man, paid in cash, hardly spoke a word. Stayed in room 4, back corner. Kept to himself mostly. Left after a week, early one morning before sunrise." "Did he leave anything behind?" the mayor asked. Mrs. Darnell hesitated. "Just this." She reached into a drawer and produced a small envelope, yellowed and creased. "Found it under the bed when I was cleaning. Didn't seem right to throw it away." The mayor turned it over in his hands. The front was blank. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, faded around the edges. It showed 2 young men standing in front of an old truck, both in uniform. They were smiling, not broadly, but with the quiet ease of shared hardship. On the back, written in faint pencil, were 4 words. "France, 1944, we made it." The mayor's chest tightened. One of the men in the photo was the veteran. The other was Ellis. He drove straight back to town. The diner was nearly empty when he arrived. The lunch rush had ended, leaving only the clatter of dishes and the low hum of the refrigerator. Ellis stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with deliberate slowness. The mayor placed the photograph on the counter between them. For a moment, Ellis didn't look down. Then, when he finally did, the color drained from his face. "Where'd you get that?" he muttered. "Room 4 at the boarding house," the mayor said. "The man you threw out left it behind." Ellis's hands stilled. The glass slipped from his grip and rolled against the counter. The mayor waited. Finally, Ellis spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't think he was still alive." That night, the mayor sat in his office long after the courthouse had closed. The lights from Main Street glowed faintly through the frosted windows. He stared at the photograph again and again, trying to piece together the story. Two soldiers, side by side. A war, a diner, and now silence. He pulled an old notebook from his drawer. A habit he'd developed during the war years when he kept notes on returning veterans, helping them find work or housing. He flipped through the pages, scanning names. Then he stopped on one, Private First Class Henry Ellis. Next to it, another name written faintly in pencil, Corporal James Dawkins, annotated with the words missing in action, France, 1944. The mayor sat back in his chair, heart pounding softly. The man in the diner, the veteran, was Corporal Dawkins. The man who threw him out was his former comrade, maybe even his commanding officer. And yet, Ellis had acted as if he didn't know him at all. The next morning, the mayor returned to the diner. This time, he came early before the customers arrived. The smell of coffee drifted through the room. Ellis looked up from the counter but said nothing. The mayor placed the photograph down once more. "You served together." Ellis's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "A long time ago. You left him in France?" Ellis didn't answer. The mayor leaned forward. "He came here for a reason. I think you know what it is." For a long moment, Ellis was silent. Then he reached into his apron pocket, pulled out a small tin box, and placed it on the counter. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of old medals, tarnished and worn. Among them was a small, bent dog tag. "I thought he was dead," Ellis said finally. "All these years." The mayor waited. Ellis stared past him, his voice distant. "We were pinned down outside a village near the Ardennes. Snow, smoke, everything burning. He took a hit in the leg, couldn't move. I was supposed to get him out, but the trucks were leaving. Command said we had to pull back. I told myself I'd come back for him. I didn't." His eyes glistened faintly, but he blinked it away. "They told me later his unit never made it out. I carried that for years. Every night. Every damn night." The mayor's voice softened. "And when he walked into your cafe?" Ellis let out a hollow laugh. "I didn't believe it. I thought it was some kind of ghost. Then I saw his face and, God help me, I felt something else. Shame, yes, but anger too. Like he'd come back to remind me of everything I tried to bury." "So you turned him away?" Ellis nodded slowly. "Because if I let him sit down, I'd have to look him in the eye. And I couldn't." The mayor said nothing. He watched the man crumble beneath the weight of his own confession. After a while, Ellis closed the box and slid it across the counter. "You can take it if you want. Doesn't mean anything anymore." The mayor shook his head. "It means everything." For several days after that, the mayor tried to find the veteran again. He called bus depots, checked hospitals, even sent a letter to the veterans' office in St. Louis. But no one had seen him since that morning by the railway line. The boarding house room remained empty. The photograph lay on the mayor's desk, the faces slowly fading from exposure to light. Then, one morning, a small package arrived at the mayor's office. No return address, postmarked from another state. Inside was a single envelope. On it, a brief note written in neat handwriting. "Mayor, thank you for your kindness. I've gone as far as I can. Tell him I remember. J.D." Beneath the note was a medal, a bronze star, and, taped to the back of it, a folded clipping from an old army newspaper. The headline read, "Two soldiers declared missing after heroic last stand." The photograph was the same one the mayor already had. But this time, someone had drawn a small cross beside Ellis's name. The mayor drove to the diner one last time. Ellis was alone, cleaning the counter as always. When he saw the mayor, he froze. The mayor handed him the package. Ellis opened it in silence, staring at the medal, the note, the newspaper clipping. His hands trembled slightly as he read the last line. "He remembers," the mayor said quietly. "And he forgave you." Ellis swallowed hard, his eyes glistening again. "Then why does it feel worse?" The mayor looked around the empty diner. The stools, the clock, the faint scent of coffee. "Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't erase what's done. It just leaves you to live with it." He turned to leave, but Ellis called after him. "Where is he now?" The mayor paused at the door. "I don't know. Maybe gone for good. Maybe where he wanted to be all along." Ellis nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. He set the medal on the counter beside the tin box, then reached for the photograph. His thumb traced the faces. Two men forever young, smiling in the ruin of war. "Funny thing," he murmured. "Back then, we thought the world would be better when we got home. Guess we didn't know what we were coming back to." The mayor watched him for a long moment before stepping out into the sunlight. That evening, the diner closed early. The blinds were drawn. Inside, Ellis sat alone at the counter, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. The medal lay in front of him, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Outside, the last of the winter snow was finally giving way to rain. He reached into the tin box, took out the dog tag, and placed it next to the medal. Then, with a quiet sigh, he turned off the lights. From the street, the diner looked like a shadow of itself. Dark windows, empty seats, the faint echo of a bell that no longer rang. But in the mayor's office, the photograph remained pinned to the wall. Two young soldiers frozen in time, neither knowing the years that would follow. And beside it, the mayor wrote a note in the margin. "Some debts aren't paid with words." By late summer, the rains had returned to Brookston. Not the kind that wash the streets clean, but the slow, steady kind that seep into the earth and stay there. The courthouse clock still chimed on the hour. The same few men gathered under the awning outside the hardware store. But something in the town's heartbeat had changed, softer, slower, like it was holding its breath. Ellis's diner no longer opened at dawn. The sign still hung crooked above the door, the paint now more rust than red. Some mornings the windows were dark. Others, a dim light glowed behind the blinds. The regulars whispered that Ellis had grown quiet, withdrawn. He no longer barked orders or cursed at the radio. Most days, he sat at the counter with a cup of black coffee, staring at the rain. The mayor saw him once or twice from across the street. He thought about going in, but something always stopped him. Maybe because he knew that some silences are sacred, that the weight a man carries alone can't be lifted by sympathy. Still, the memory of the soldier lingered like a ghost that refused to leave town. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after that winter morning, a letter arrived at the mayor's office. It came in an unmarked envelope, its edges damp from the rain. The handwriting was unfamiliar, careful, almost formal. Inside was a single page. "Dear Mayor, you don't know me, but I believe you knew my father. He passed away last month. In his things, I found your name and this town's address. He spoke of a man he once met here, a cafe owner, and something he wished he'd said to him before he left. I thought you might want to know. Enclosed is something he meant to return. Sarah Dawkins." Beneath the letter was a small, weathered dog tag, the same one Ellis had kept in his tin box, except this one bore a different name, Henry Ellis. The mayor sat back in his chair, reading the letter again and again. His hands trembled slightly. Outside, the rain drummed softly against the window. The realization came slowly, like a door creaking open after years of rust. If Ellis had kept Dawkins's tag all these years, and Dawkins had kept Ellis's, then they hadn't abandoned each other at all. That evening, the mayor drove through the rain to the diner. The sky hung low and gray, the road glistening with puddles. When he stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Ellis looked up from the counter, surprised. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said quietly. The mayor removed his hat, shaking off the rain. "Got something for you." He placed the letter and the dog tag on the counter. Ellis stared at them without touching them. When he finally reached out, his fingers shook. He turned the tag over slowly, tracing the engraved letters as though reading an old prayer. "He had this?" Ellis asked. The mayor nodded. "All these years." For a long time, Ellis said nothing. The clock ticked softly behind him. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. "I thought I left him there," Ellis whispered. "That day in France. The trucks were pulling out, and I couldn't find him in the smoke." I called his name until I couldn't hear my own voice. When I came home, they said he was gone. So I carried his tag. It was the only piece I had left. The mayor listened quietly. Ellis looked up, his eyes distant. But if he had mine, he exhaled, a sound that was almost a sob. Then he did come back for me. The mayor nodded slowly. Looks like he did. Ellis turned the dog tag over again, staring at it like it might dissolve if he blinked. He came home, and I sent him out into the cold. After everything, the rain beat harder against the windows. The cafe felt smaller somehow, the air thick with the ghosts of unspoken words. He forgave you, the mayor said softly. That note, the medal, he wanted you to know. Ellis gave a bitter smile. Forgiveness doesn't change what's done. No, the mayor replied. But maybe it changes what comes after. The next morning, the diner stayed closed. A handwritten sign hung in the window. Back soon. People talked, of course. In towns like Brookston, silence invites speculation. Some said Ellis had gone to the city. Others claimed he'd left for good. Only the mayor knew where he'd gone. He found him a week later, standing by the small military cemetery on the hill just beyond the river. The grass was high, the air thick with the hum of cicadas. Ellis stood before a simple white cross marked Corporal James Dawkins, 1919 to 1956. Fresh flowers lay at its base, already darkened by rain. I didn't know where else to go, Ellis said when the mayor approached. His voice was soft, unsteady. Didn't even know he was buried here. He wasn't, the mayor replied. Not until recently. His daughter brought him home. Said he asked for it in his will, to be buried where it snowed. Ellis stared at the headstone for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out his own dog tag, the one he'd carried for decades. Without a word, he placed it beside the flowers. I kept it because I thought I owed him a memory, he said quietly. Turns out he already gave me one. The mayor said nothing. The wind stirred the grass, carrying the faint scent of rain and soil. As they stood there, Ellis began to speak. Slowly, like a man unburdening himself for the first time. He saved my life once, he said. Outside Bastogne. We were taking fire from the ridge and I froze. Couldn't move. He pushed me down, took the hit that should have been mine. After the blast, I thought he was gone. But he lived. Carried that wound the rest of his days, I guess. He looked toward the gray horizon. I thought running that diner, building something steady, would make up for it. But it just made me smaller. Meaner. The mayor listened, his hands clasped behind his back. You can't change what's behind you. No, Ellis said. But maybe you can stop pretending it didn't happen. The following week, a small notice appeared in the Brookston Chronicle. After 20 years of serving our town, Ellis's Diner will be closing its doors. Thank you for your patronage. No explanation followed, but word spread quickly that the cafe had been sold to the church across the street. Within months, the building was repainted, its windows cleaned, and a new sign hung above the door. The Memorial Café. All are welcome. Inside, the same counter remained, but one wall was different now. Above the corner booth hung a framed photograph. 2 soldiers in front of a truck, smiling faintly beneath a gray European sky. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "In memory of those who came home and those who brought them." Every morning, rain or shine, a single cup of coffee sat beneath the picture. Black, untouched. No one knew who placed it there, but the mayor had his suspicions. Years passed. The town changed as towns do. The courthouse clock was replaced, the bakery closed, and new faces filled the sidewalks. But whenever the rain returned, slow, steady, and endless, people remembered the story. The veteran who came seeking warmth, the cafe owner who turned him away, the mayor who carried their truth. One autumn evening, long after the Memorial Café had changed owners again, the mayor received one final letter. It was written in a shaky hand on plain stationery. Mayor, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't let anyone make a fuss. I've had more years than I deserved. I kept his tag until the end. I wanted to believe that if there's something beyond all this war, hate, regret. He's waiting somewhere warm, maybe with coffee already poured. Tell his daughter I'm sorry I didn't do more when it mattered. And thank you for helping me remember what it means to be human again. H. Ellis. The mayor folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the photograph on his desk. Then he sat in silence, listening to the rain against the glass. He thought of two men in a foreign land, young, frightened, believing they'd come home to a better world. He thought of how years could twist good intentions into something unrecognizable. And he thought of how forgiveness, once given, never really leaves. It lingers like a quiet echo, not erasing what happened, but softening its edges. Outside, the rain thickened, turning the streets to silver. Somewhere, a cafe bell chimed faintly, though the shop was long closed. The mayor closed his eyes and imagined the sound of a door opening, the smell of fresh coffee, a man in a worn army coat, smiling as another pours him a cup. And for a moment, just a moment, the years between them seemed to dissolve. That night, the mayor walked to the cemetery. The path was slick with rain, the air cool and still. He stopped before two headstones standing side by side, Corporal James Dawkins, and beneath it, newly carved, Private Henry Ellis. Someone had placed a coin on each two silver pieces, gleaming faintly under the streetlight. The same kind of coin the veteran had once left on the counter so many years ago. The mayor smiled sadly and tipped his hat. You finally shared that coffee, didn't you? The rain whispered in reply. When dawn came, the sky was pale and washed clean. The river mist rose over Brookston, curling around the rooftops and telephone wires. The Memorial Café opened its doors to the scent of brewing coffee and fresh bread. On the wall, beneath the photograph of two soldiers, a small note had been added in careful handwriting. They forgave each other long before we did. And every year on that day, when the first autumn rain began to fall, the mayor would walk past the diner and pause by the window. He'd watch the steam rise from that single untouched cup and think, not of guilt or shame, but of the quiet, haunting truth that lingered behind it all. That sometimes the warmest acts of love come too late to be seen, but never too late to be felt.